how have you been thinking about cognition differently compared to people?
So I think of cognition as not a special category, but as not sort of something distinct from other things, but rather part of a much bigger picture. So basically, cognition is one of the ways in which humans categorize the activities of allostasis. So I think of allostasis. So, like the way this is traditionally defined in neuroscience, it's like predictive regulation of your internal energy system. Like you need energy to do stuff. You need energy allocated to the things you're doing. Like if you're eating food, you need it allocated to digestion. If you're fighting a disease, you need it allocated to the immune system. If you're low on energy, you need to make decisions to go get energy. So there's a sense in which, life and sort of behavior is all about managing your internal energy economy. And when you have a system that's doing that, it starts doing all these really interesting things like walking and talking and moving around and stuff. Cognition is one of the ways in which human beings categorize the outputs of an allostatic system. So, what's really going on is allostasis. Cognition is one way in which we human observers make sense of what we're seeing.
What do you mean by that? So, cognition is like used, for example, to go about and solve complex goals in the world, and that helps us stay in balance and biological equilibrium, or am I getting it wrong?
Cognition is something that happens second and doesn't really happen at all. It's something that it's a way a human chooses to view a system. What a human being or any other kind of agent is doing is managing their internal energy economy. And then when we do that for some complicated reason, that's basically just a lot of empirics, one of the things we do is stuff that we call thinking, problem solving. Like if I'm going somewhere and there's an obstacle in my way, I'm going to use some of my energy to notice that and route around it. And that takes energy. And we're going to call that cognition. But cognition isn't really anything in particular. It's a way of categorizing the activities of allostasis. So I know that can be
Mm.
confusing for people because we tend to think of cognition as something fundamental. I think that that's incorrect. Cognition is something that's constructed by the economic activity of an agentic system.
Mm. Like, not only do we think about cognition as fundamental, we sometimes think about it as almost magical. Like, wow, cognition, wow, it does something magical. Humans maybe have it above and beyond other animals or whatever, wherever we think cognition happens. But then maybe you're saying that if we think about cognition like this, it's just this fundamental fact of biology that systems need to stay in equilibrium, and if they're solving goals, they need to get around things. It just cognition happens everywhere.
Yeah, as far as I can think, any system that a human would make sense to look at that and be like, I'm going to call that a system, that system will be an allostatic system. And therefore, it will potentially be a thing humans will want to do to call its behavior cognitive. Like a rock rolling down a hill, it's perfectly reasonable to call that cognitive. It's also perfectly reasonable not to, because cognition is a categorization decision. So if someone wants to say, I think it's useful to categorize it that way because of what the category does for me. So like categories, it's like tomatoes, like fruits and vegetables. Like is a tomato a fruit or is it a vegetable? It's not about like the true empirical reality of it. It's like, am I eating a salad or am I growing a garden? If it's a salad, it's probably a vegetable. If you're trying to plant it, you're probably thinking of it as a fruit, like a berry. The same is true of cognition. It's like, what am I trying to do? Does it make sense to categorize the activities here as cognition or not, based on how I personally think about cognition and what I'm personally trying to accomplish?
When we think about cognition like that, though, uh, I'm trying to understand how humans are different from, say, rocks. Then, so like, if a rock is moving or it's not moving, it's trying to it's a system we can see it is a rock. Therefore, by
Mhm.
being what it is, it must be in a way optimize. Like, I think about the free energy principle. It must be optimizing something in order just to exist, or else it would just dissipate, not be there, not be a rock anymore. Um, but then for humans, what is different? There's something scaled
Mhm.
up, many different agents coming together, like with the cells of our body. How should we think about that?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. My guess is that cells are much smarter than the things that make up rocks, just like, the cellular economy is made of cells, and like the human economy is made of humans, and our economy is much more impressive than the cellular economy because humans are smarter than cells. Similarly, cells are smarter than the molecules that make up rocks. So one way of thinking about that is maybe if you have an economy of smarter agents, you're going to have a much more impressive economy and therefore much more impressive allostatic activity. Also, maybe the cognitive glue works better. So I don't know what the cognitive glue of a rock is. It's probably something like just sharing like physical impulses. Like if you tap one part of a rock, the rest of the rock is going to feel that. Whereas bioelectricity in a cellular economy is probably much better at like doing the job of managing the economy. And then maybe the price system is even better than the bioelectric system. I think bioelectricity does have a bunch of problems the price system either doesn't seem to have or seems better at solving. So I think there's two sort of a priori answers to the question you've asked. What's the difference between rocks and people? One is smarter subagents, molecules versus cells, and the other is a better cognitive glue, impulse sharing versus bioelectricity.
Tell me what you mean by a cellular economy, about an economy making up our biological organism. People are going to be like, what are we? Maybe I was just talking about it with you before and we know it. I'm constantly writing on your Substack to you, but tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my paper with Mike, the hypothesis basically is that multicellular organisms can be usefully understood as being economies of cells. So, each cell is an economic agent. That basically means it wants stuff, it has some tiny little goals. Those goals, I'm not a biologist, but basically like get food, avoid predators, reproduce, and that's what it's trying to do. And it needs to get resources to do that, like energy. It needs energy and other things to do that, and it's in competition with all of the other cells in your body to get those resources and do the activities it wants to do, just like people in the economy are in competition with each other over the things we want, like food, clothing, housing, etc. And what happens is all of the cells coordinate with each other with a system called bioelectricity. They share electrical signals with each other, and the bioelectrical signals behave like a price system. So what you have is a bunch of cells coordinating and trading with each other, just like people do with prices in the economy. And the result is a cellular economy. And my idea, I can't speak for Mike, but basically is the activities of this economy are really everything that you see and do. All of your cognition, action, perception, your memory, your emotions, etc. These are all the outputs of your cellular economy.
It's still funny for me to think about, though. We think about ourselves and why should they be in competition with each other? Is that how biologists usually think about it? Like, we're
I don't know how biologists think about it, but it seems like it's just got to be true because the resources are scarce. So if I'm a cell, I want all the energy for myself because why would I care about you? Why would I care about anybody? I just want it all, but you want it all too. So there's going to be some resources where I'm trying to get it and you're trying to get it. So we're competing over scarce resources. I mean, just why would humans compete over scarce resources? Well, because there's only so many apples in the apple tree. I want them all. You want them all. Now we're in competition.
Mm. Could someone argue that if we're all cells in the same body, maybe we have the same DNA and we are just kind of, I don't know, we just like each other, like I'm not going to be a selfish cell. I'm going to give to my cell neighbors, I'm part of this multicellular organism. So I'm not really in competition with other cells.
Yeah, you could say the same thing about human beings, right? Like we're all very genetically similar to each other, but yet we make war against each other and so on. Of course, we do also share with each other. And I expect that, again, not a biologist, but I expect you will see cells doing things that humans do where they share with each other and help each other at no obvious benefit to themselves. But the correct way to approach economics with humans is at the end of the day, we're competing over scarce resources. That's like the big fact. And then, like, small scale local cooperation is a much smaller and less robust fact. And I expect the same is true of cells as well.
No, that makes sense with humans. I think, at least empirically, I think the findings would bear that out. And so then, okay, we look at like a multicellular organism as an economy. Uh, why should we still make an analogy to our economy? Like, why is it analogous to a price system? So a price system is helping us coordinate and I guess do that sharing and competing over scarce resources in a little bit more friendly way that I can solve my own problems and help other people solve their problems. And
Mhm.
tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of lines to discuss here. One is just that when you see Mike talk about what bioelectricity does, it clearly does all the same things that the price system does. I mean, they're clearly analogous. Like the way that bioelectricity controls the form of the organism, and he can grow like two-headed flatworms and get them to grow the heads of other species and stuff. That's what the price system does. You can radically reorient how an economy looks just by changing price signals. Like if you subsidize one kind of housing while taxing another kind, you're going to get a lot more of the first kind of housing and a lot less of the second kind. So in principle, if I had like arbitrary control over the price system, I can make it look like any kind of crazy thing I want to. I can make it start building a lot of this kind of thing and then a lot of this kind of thing. So we see the price system do the same kind of thing. As for what that thing is doing, the answer that I think is something I call interoception sharing. So basically, I feel feelings inside of me about what's going on, and I use those feelings to make decisions. In order for us to coordinate, we need a way of sharing those feelings with each other so that I make decisions that are compatible with what you're doing, and you make decisions that are compatible with what I'm doing. We humans share interoceptive signals with each other via the price system. So if I need a pencil, I go bid on a pencil, and that gets factored into demand, and it raises the price of pencils a little bit, right? Or if I, get a pencil, then that's shared, the reward of that is shared with the guy who sold me the pencil. So like my gratitude becomes his reward, right? So we're able to share feelings with each other through the price system. And in doing so, we end up forming a shared view of what's happening, and all of our decisions agree with each other. The same thing happens in cells with bioelectricity, and Mike is quite clear about this, that cells are able to basically take internal feelings and put them into other cells via the electrical transmission system. And so the cells all end up feeling the same stuff. They share stress with each other. If one cell's unhappy, the other cells are unhappy, and they all change their behavior until everything's coordinated.
I like the analogy between the bioelectricity and the price system, particularly because with bioelectricity, Michael Levin has that cool work where with bioelectric signals, you can get biology, whether that's our tissues or planaria, especially to build new, even weird stuff like new heads, right? And you're like, why was this even needed? But nevertheless, the biology can do it. Um, and you don't need to control and micromanage the planaria to grow a new head. It kind of knows how to do it if you sort of coerce it to. Similarly, if we had that unfortunate fact that you were in charge of the economy, then yeah, you could start building random new houses or whatever you wanted to build, whatever your fancy would be. So okay, but then I'm still wondering, what more evidence would we need to think that bioelectricity does connect cells in a way that's like, or maybe even the reverse question is like, because our biology is very interconnected. We can think about that almost more naturally. But in the economy, why are we all building shared views of the world by the price system? Tell me what we mean by
Mhm.
that.
Well, first of all, as far as the cellular picture is concerned, cells probably don't see themselves as being connected to each other. Like when I look at your body or you look at mine, like our human eyes see like a single piece, right? But if you're a tiny little cell in that body, it's going to seem like this big, fast jungle. So I don't know that cells see themselves as intrinsically connected to their body the way we would because they're tiny, right? And so, as far as the economy goes, basically, what's incredible about it is that we are really separated. Like, I have no seeming physical interaction with like some guy in China working in some factory making some product that I use, but through the price system, we become coordinated anyway. And that's part of the reason to think that bioelectricity is like a price system. The price system is so uniquely powerful at achieving this large scale coordination across space and time that any system that's achieving similar effects, which bioelectricity is, must be similar to the price system. It has to be. Just mathematically, that's true.
Hmm. Um, it's still weird though, with us humans. Not everything is using prices, I suppose, and money. But I guess we can also like, I saw you write it, like even if we're just walking in the street, and we're gonna bump into someone, we don't bump into them. We can sort of coordinate and move
Mhm.
away from each other. But I guess, do we need prices? Like,
Right now, it's very difficult for humans to use prices in a lot of circumstances. So basically, transaction costs are very high in a lot of situations. Like if we're walking in a street, to pause and be like, I'm willing to pay, 5 cents to use the right lane while you use the left lane. That's way costlier than just working things out some other way. So in many situations right now, we do use non-price alternatives. Those do have the weakness of being less efficient. Like we do often awkwardly navigating around someone can be quite awkward. And if we did just have a price system for it, it would be very simple. In the future, I do suspect technology will continue to bring transaction costs down. I do think you can envision a future where just as you're going somewhere, you're like beaming prices to other people, like showing your plans and stuff, and they can like buy an opportunity from you to walk past you on one side while you walk past on the other side, and technology makes that super easy. But yeah, in practice right now, we don't always rely on prices, and I'm sure that's true of cells as well, that they also have other systems beyond just prices for managing coordination. Although, again, to do anything at the sort of super large scale across space and time, like to manage an entire body or a global economy, it's definitely mostly the price system or mostly bioelectricity, because there's just no way any other system can imitate that.
It's interesting. Would you say that it would be best if prices were everywhere? I'm not denying that they're really useful. But I'm almost thinking when we turn it to biology, even, uh, I'm sometimes wondering, is biology not smarter than that? Like if I mean, just the fact that it doesn't actually have, like, it doesn't even need money. We have to like get the idea. We need money, and we have to implement it as a technology. Whereas biology just seems to work, and no one like came in and created money and created prices. It's like almost maybe more naturally in the biophysiology of how it works. It must be, as you say, if your argument is correct, implementing some kind of price system. Or maybe like the only reason that we see biology in multicellular organisms in the first place is that we're in that world where like bioelectricity is here. It acts like a price system. I don't know.
If transaction costs were zero, so if there were no cost to using the price system, then I am extremely confident, as should all economists be, that we would immediately end up with a system of complete markets, meaning that every single interaction between all economic agents would be mediated fully and completely by prices and only prices, because they are the best system for coordinating. So if it was always really easy to use the price system, that is always and only what would ever happen. In practice, again, transaction costs are often quite high between human beings, and I'm sure the same is true of cells. I imagine in practice, there probably is a lot of similarity between how humans developed the price system and how cells developed bioelectricity, where it's not like someone had like the big vision of a body or an economy, but just a lot of local, like, well, I'll trade this for that. And over time, you get certain exchange ratios and exchange tokens. Similarly, cells just trying to coordinate and like help each other build to help themselves. Like, I'll put some electricity into you, you put some into me. So I imagine it went, well, not actually similarly, but basically it starts small scale in both cases, and things build up and scale up until suddenly you have this much more incredible system.
I wonder what you think about, like, with, say, if you apply the price system in an economy, think, okay, there must be something analogous in, say, a whole biological organism. But then, like, when we look at a biological organism, there are many levels we could look at. Like, we could look at tissues or cells or within a cell, and the molecules in it. And then do price systems occur in there, like to organize, I don't know, the molecules in the right way for the cell to be a self-sustaining organism? I'm just trying to think about, then where
Yeah.
does it apply? Where doesn't it?
That's a really good question. I think it's highly plausible that cells are also economies. So, a multicellular organism is an economy of cells, and then each individual cell is an economy of molecules and whatever other things are inside of it. I have no clue what the cognitive glue might be in that case, but I think that's something that scientists should really dig into. Pretty much any time we're seeing coordination, people should be trying to figure out what's the cognitive glue here, what's keeping things together, and I think that could really yield dividends. But yeah, I have no clue what the specific answer is, but that's a great question.
So I'm also trying to understand how maybe in biology we sometimes, a lot often, I guess, you have cells just being killed, to protect the rest of the body, right? We have systems in place in biology such that if some cells are infected or cancerous, then they get killed. And then, like in economics, everyone's making a choice, someone has to agree to that. So why did the cells agree to just die?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a clear analogy in the behavior of corporations. If you have a corporation that's worth $10 million and you pay it $11 million to dissolve itself, it will happily take the money and commit suicide. Right? So corporations don't have a survival instinct like that. If you pay them more than what they're worth, they're happy to dissolve themselves. And the same seems to be true of cells. Now, humans seem to have stronger survival instincts. We put a much higher price on our own continued existence. However, we don't put an infinite price. You can pay, a coal miner to go into a coal mine and, inhale a bunch of stuff that's bad for him, do a bunch of painful physical labor that's going to cause issues down the line. In the past, people are also just very ignorant of those issues. But even today, people are willing to do dangerous work around, toxic chemicals and things, and they're probably shortening their lifespan. But if you pay someone enough, they're willing to do it. So at every
Mm.
scale, we see the same kind of behavior.
But yeah, say with a human, them willingly taking some probability that they'll die, and it's doing difficult things. Is that though not for care of others, or maybe it's just difficult to define what people's goals are? But like, yeah, maybe they persist after one's death, and so you could actually willingly agree to die.
The traditional understanding of biological and economic goals as being about survival, reproduction, and material self interest are empirically false. As we see in the case of cells, survival is not paramount in organisms. As we see in the case of many organisms that don't do a lot to reproduce, like pandas, many humans not reproducing, that's like a big thing people are talking about. It is not the case that reproduction is like the biological drive in economics, traditionally people imagine it's all about getting stuff. Again, we just don't see that empirically. So I think there's something very wrong with how we traditionally envision how goals work and what goals are really about. I know Mike has talked about like part of what agents seem to try to do is just find new goal spaces to work in. I have some ideas about this. They're pretty vague, but basically, you're noticing real empirical anomalies and you are correct to notice them, and they cannot be addressed by like some flippant little like, oh, that's like a weird little side situation, or like, well, if you think about it like this, it actually is good for their survival. Like, it's not good for their survival. Those are real empirical problems, and if and when we eventually make progress on them, that's going to be a big deal.
Mm. To come back to then understanding the a multicellular organism, because we might think that DNA just encodes for things like cells dying, like it's not good for the cell. But maybe Richard Dawkins would say it doesn't matter. The DNA encodes it, and it like the cells just now has grown up as part of this multicellular organism through generations with the same DNA, and so it's agreed to die. Um, but so why should even more generally, why should cells have agency beyond just DNA? Like, tell me a bit about why a cell could make some kind of economy with the rest of its
Yeah.
cellmates.
So there's two things going on there. First of all, I don't know a lot of biology, so my ability to argue with Dawkins is going to be pretty limited. But my understanding is that cancer cells are cells that are just part of the body, and they have the same DNA as the other cells that they're creating problems for. So clearly, sharing DNA is not sufficient to get things working. I don't see why it should be necessary. Like, I don't know why bioelectricity couldn't work across different kinds of DNA. Maybe Mike knows more about that. As far as why cells should be agents, I think agency is why shouldn't things be agents? I mean, agency is a very basic thing. So I've got a couple of essays about this in my blog. Agency is basic and simple in economics. Basically, people think agency is the super big thing that means like you have a soul and like this human like consciousness and experience. In economics, what it means is you have preferences and you make choices and you have some degree of rationality. Choices are selections over alternatives. So you construct. This is Paul. Do you know Paul Chisek's work at all?
A bit. I've
So
read some of your work, but go on.
I'll send you some stuff about him. So he's super important. He's very important to both Thalen and Lee. We'll talk about that later. So basically, you construct patterns of prediction signals inside of you. Like your cells do this, your muscles do this. And those prediction signals in the aggregate produce effects that we call your behavior, like you'll move an arm around or something. Now, when you're doing this, you're actually producing multiple competing patterns at the same time. So it's not just one thing, but many different kinds of things you could be doing that are all being produced inside you at once, which allows you to respond quickly to different possible events. What happens is as these things compete with each other, one pattern wins out while the others are inhibited, and that results in the particular activity that you see. So the process of selection among these patterns of signals is what I call a choice. So that's choice. That's obviously something that's not limited to humans. That's happening all over the place. Preferences are the internal factors that bias the construction and selection of alternatives. So that's just going to exist anywhere that you have, because you're always going to have factors biasing things. That's just like inherent to like the shape of a model, right? And then rationality is basically the degree to which your choices are consistent as the environment changes, which we could talk more about. But basically, that picture of agency is entirely third person. So we don't need to ask any questions about what is the first person experience of a cell. Are cells conscious? Do they have feelings? Do they care about things the way that we feel ourselves caring? Irrelevant to the question of agency. And it's something we'd expect to see anywhere. I mean, you're going to have that's, a rock's going to have that because the parts of the rock are signaling to each other because things send signals to each other. It's happening all the time. So I think agency is all over the place. I think it's just empirically true. People can at me about that, but it's an empirical question. And yeah, so that definitely applies to cells.
Right. So agency, even in ourselves, is actually not that big a deal. Economics is actually makes pretty limited assumptions about it, and they can be relaxed as well, like rationality. And then you still get a lot of like. So even though a cell doesn't have a brain, doesn't necessarily need that. Um, and then in doing this, you get a lot of explanatory power, as you say, like what you seem to be saying when you're trying to choose an action of how to move properly to solve some complex goal, and then you don't need to figure it out perfectly because if you have many different movement plans sort of competing, then they can all figure it out at different levels, and then you overall the right thing happens for the whole organism, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very Hayekian. Each part of the system, like each cell or each molecule or whatever, can contribute its own local knowledge, right? There's things happening all over you and around you. Each cell has a little piece of the puzzle. And when each cell is sending its own prediction signals, and then those signals coordinate and compete with each other to produce an aggregate outcome, that produces something far more intelligent than any individual part of you, like your brain, would be able to. Of course, the brain also being made of neurons. But yeah, it's a fantastically effective system. And by having multiple competing options, it lets you be able to respond to more circumstances. Like you're right now, you're not aware of it, but you're producing possible things you could say that are like ready to be said in response to different things that I could say. Like if I say, I really like sandwiches, how about you? That doesn't like totally shock you because you're already predicting that and ready for it to some degree. Like you can produce the response much faster than if nothing was going on in your brain except for like the one thing you're most expecting.
Right. What's weird though and interesting when I've read some other of your essays is that you think maybe like we're applying it to cognition, but then even embryogenesis or other kinds of creation, morphogenesis, the creation and building of our body, and even thoughts, and yeah, we it seems that this whatever we're calling cognition or this economic system happens all over, or at least whatever we call it. There are these analogies between all these different systems. Tell me about
Yes,
that.
yeah, you're exactly right. When you learn about this allostatic prediction signal kind of picture of how thought works, you also see in motor behavior, and these ideas, in fact, come from motor behavior, you see the same kinds of things. So, like, if you talk on a really basic level about how motor behavior is put together, and then you talk about how morphogenesis is put together, and you talk about how emotion and memory are put together, and you talk about how the economy in the usual sense is put together, it's all the same thing. So when I talk about cognition as just being a categorization of what's going on, that's what I mean. Anytime your brain thinks something, there's nothing fundamental about what's going on that is like intrinsically distinct from what's happening when you wave your arm back and forth. Like even if you were waving without your brain being part of that, it's still the same type of process. So you can choose to categorize that as cognition. You can choose to categorize it as action or perception or anything else you find useful. And that's why everything is just a categorization of allostasis.
Do you think with cognition not being some magical thing on top of, say, the body and just it, and it always in a coordinated fashion helping predict each part and trying to achieve allostasis, equilibrium, maintaining itself, um, do you think that, um, okay, so Like what is different than like about thinking? Maybe there's embodied cognition, right? Like maybe what do you think about that, right? That like if we limit the ability for us to move our arms or our body, then we're not able to think as clearly, right? Like there is no clear separation between our thoughts and our body, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, and I do have some thoughts that I'm working on with Mike about this, about a generalized definition of body. Basically, my understanding is that the history of embodied cognition, things started out pretty narrow. So, like, historically, you had this picture of thought as like this inherently abstract thing, this disembodied brain just floating in space, just doing pure abstract reasoning. And people noticed, well, hey, you really need to like do stuff in the real world, both for your cognition to actually like have any consequences and also to get information. Like to find things out about this pen, I need to touch it. So it's really hard to distinguish thought from like the stuff your body is doing. And then that got generalized over time. I'm interested in a picture of embodiment. Again, working on a paper about this with Mike that will generalize a body to basically any coordinating system. So I've got an essay about this on my website. The economies body is people, with the concept of a body as a system through which interoceptive signals are shared. The economy unquestionably has a body, which consists of you and me, just like our body consists of cells sharing bioelectric signals with each other. So I think
Mm,
bodies are everywhere, including like AI and other seemingly very abstract systems. They definitely have bodies. They're just not in forms we're used to looking at.
really? So even like large language models, like they have a kind of body that you think they must be doing something similar to what we're seeing here?
I think so, because I don't understand how else they could coordinate the parts of their system to produce coherent, consistent responses to what people say. I don't know anything about how computers work, but let's say that they're made of transistors sharing electrical signals with each other. In that case, the electrical signals are the cognitive glue, and the transistors are the body. And that to me feels quite intuitive. I mean, they're made of transistors, right? So there's your body.
The thing is with large language models is maybe someone could argue that doesn't actually make any sense to like there isn't that much structure within the system maybe, but we're just hallucinating meaning into it. Although there is work on sort of the fact that actually within the large language models there are models and it's not random. So but like transistors are not naturally, I guess, together, um, and we're sort of putting them together. Do you think that though nevertheless, you think that they may be like now that you've thrown this computer together, nevertheless now they're trying to achieve sort of coordination with one another?
Yeah, people and cells are not naturally together either. You put a human on an island, I mean, they're still doing human stuff. It's fine. Uh, what binds things to a body is a bunch of parts that. So, like, why do we call this my body? Because you have these parts that behave in a very coordinated way. Like, if I get an itch on this is my right arm, my left hand is going to scratch it, right? So that's an empirical observation that one part is going to take care of another part very readily, very consistently. If you get an itch, I'm not scratching that. I don't even know about it, right? So like that's such a silly thing, but it's actually an empirical pattern, right? My individual body, we call it a body because of the way it behaves with respect to itself and doesn't behave with respect to any other body. And the same for your body and everyone else's. Well, if we look at the economy, we see the same kind of pattern. When you have people connected through a certain signaling system, they will scratch each other's itches. If some guy out there needs a potato, he bids on a potato, someone goes gets him a potato, right? So that's scratching his itch, right? So when you connect things through a cognitive glue, you get these body-like behaviors. So why not call it a body?
Mm. This might be an annoying question, but I was talking to some people about how maybe in biology or just in existence in general, like the way anything exists is through love, through self-sacrifice, like the fact that you could apply it to biology and like maybe a cell has to sort of appreciate that it is also the sum of its parts in a way, and so it needs to give itself up to the cells to be a cell. A body needs to do that. Maybe even humans could aspire to that. I don't even think this is sort of against what we're saying about economics. But does this make any sense to you? Or maybe it's like, no, this is stupid. We don't need it. We don't need love.
Two answers. One is it makes sense in the sense that it pushes back against the idea of naive survival and reproduction, that every cell just wants to survive and stuff. I think that's empirically false. It's a wrong concept about how biological goals work and about how goals in general work. So I appreciate things that are trying to push back against that, because I think that's an empirically problematic idea. The other aspect of my answer is, one of the useful things, there's a bunch of people working on these kinds of ideas and related ideas, and each one person brings their own individual history and their own perspective, and that's a valuable thing. Part of what I bring to the table is I'm not a big ideas kind of person, and I have no interest in things that like sound cool. Like, to me, these really are just very plain empirical questions. Like I say, the economy's body is people. That may sound like this crazy big idea. I think it's actually an extremely logical empirical argument that just actually you can find the preliminaries to it in Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, where he talks about how if you stub your toe, that's a big deal. But if some guy dies in an accident far away, you don't care. That's like cognitive glue in bodies and stuff. Like, it's all right there. So I like to be the guy who's not thinking big thoughts, not being like, whoa, what about love and this and that? Because it's good to have one of those people around. And I think it's good to know that you can think these crazy sounding thoughts while just being a very hard headed empiricist, just trying to apply model evidence, model evidence, model evidence over and over. That's what I try to do. And I think that works.
Oh, I like that. And I would think that I would say this person thinking about love in biology or many other contexts is actually not trying to make it a weird
Yeah,
thing,
I'm not trying to. I'm
But
sure they're doing the same thing as well. But yeah, like, even if things sound, yeah, I just want people to understand,
no,
like,
yeah,
you can
no.
get there. Yeah,
And it can sound provocative, but it's like, look, like just read what I'm saying, listen to what I'm saying. Is it actually that weird? And then I think that's really helpful, right? And I told you off the air, like first sort of was getting into your stuff, and I'm like, what is this person saying? And is this just weird for the sake of it? But then the way you said it, and it's so matter of fact, I'm like, this no, maybe this it makes sense to this person, and
yeah,
it's slowly making sense to me.
that's
Um,
very flattering. Thank you, and I appreciate you reading and commenting. It's really encouraging.
Thank you. No, I mean, really enjoy it.
Yeah.
One thing I want to understand actually is, so we talked about cognition in general, but like, let's say we think about higher order cognition, and like the deep, complex problem solving we do, maybe that we can maybe only do as a human, whereas our cells can't do it. Um, do you have any story for how we can think about neurons and just how we might do more complex, coordinated activities?
No, I mean, nothing specific other than for some reason things scale up. And I have some ideas about why. So basically, if you have a bunch of molecules interacting, they sometimes produce a cell, and that cell can do things those molecules can't. Then cells interact and they produce a human, and the human can do things that the cells can't. Humans interact to produce an economy that can do things that we can't. So that is the empirical pattern. Why is that the empirical pattern? The one idea I have about that is, what coordination does, what a cognitive glue does, is it turns plans from obstacles into affordances. So, in sort of like natural economic state with no cognitive glue, you and I are just in competition with each other. Your plan to acquire an apple is an obstacle to my plan to acquire that same apple, right? So that's a problem for both of us. But when we're all really coordinated, your plans actually become affordances to me. And that's the concept of division of labor in economics. So if you plan to be a farmer and I plan to be a garment maker, my plan to be a garment maker can happen because of your plan to be a farmer, and vice versa. I don't need to spend time growing food because you're doing it. You don't need to spend time working on clothing because I'm doing it. And then we can just trade with each other. And that allows each of us to become much more skilled. You can spend all day practicing farming. I spend all day practicing garment making. And so we each scale up our abilities. And as you add to that and add to that, as the economy has done, you end up with people and systems that are massively more capable than they otherwise would be.
Mm. Another thing, we kind of brought it up, in thinking about everything as being a choice, even in a multicellular organism, if it works in terms of economics. Uh, Help me explain something like emotions, where I'm particularly interested in emotions because then in that, and I talked to Josh Bach actually about this, about like, do we choose our own emotions? Because it kind of feels like, oh, sometimes, I just get angry or I get sad, and I'm like, I don't even want to feel this. You can almost repress it, but then in one level, everything is a choice in your biology, even if it like seems, like we often view emotions as hard coded. Oh, just fear. It's like a emotional evolutionary response. It just happens, and now you have the fear or sadness circuit being triggered. How should we think about basic facts of biology, like emotion, through this lens?
That's a really good question. First of all, have you talked to Eli Senish or Jordan Thoreau? I think that's how you say his name. I'm not really sure. So
No,
there are a
I've
couple
heard
of
of them.
people who
Go
work
on,
in Lisa's lab. They've written some really cool papers. I'm going to send you their information. You should reach out
please.
to both of them, check out their papers. You should definitely try to get them on your podcast. I'd be super interested in those conversations. That's Lisa Feldman Barrett's lab. So as far as the choice making, so Lisa, this is actually a big inspiration to me. She's got this chapter title called On the Automaticity of Emotions. I think back in 2007. She's basically pointing out that, like, yes, our first person experience of emotions is that they just happen all of a sudden and you can't control them. But the third person study of emotions produces a very different picture. Just like the third person study of agency is very different from the first person study of agency. The third person study of emotion shows that you have this really powerful internal control system, like your internal model, and it's making all these predictions and dealing with all of these possibilities. And to call that some irrational, hard coded thing is just absurd on the evidence. It's clearly rational decision making, even if it doesn't match our first person experiences as like a conscious being about what that should feel like. We observe it happening. And so Lisa's argument there actually very influential to what I've tried to develop with what we just talked about preferences and choices in third person terms of prediction signals.
Mm. Another thing we talked about it earlier as well, but
Mhm.
in physics and even a rock, this should happen. That just because the rock is like connected, not in any fancy way, like in biology or through prices or whatever, but just like physically, mechanically, one part of the rock is connected to the other side of the rock. So, is there economics or optimization behavior even in physics, and why would that be?
So Mike has talked about how least action principles sure seem like agency. And I recall having looked at those as well independently and having come to the same conclusion, where it sure looks like physicists are saying that the behavior of the most fundamental particles is all about optimizing certain things the way you'd expect an agent to. Now, people seem to want to insist that that's like a metaphor. I don't understand what's metaphorical about it. Like, it seems like it is the literal reality. So that's the answer: is least action laws. How to turn that into a bigger argument to like show people like, hey, for real, this is agency. I'm afraid I'm not equipped with the physics or math to do that, but that's definitely the starting point.
Mm. With thinking about, say, that even physics has this optimization, but especially in biology, when we just because I wonder. You talked about pragmatically, practically. I think this is true. So does it help us understand biology, and could it help us help understand different diseases? Like, in what way is it a better model of biology?
The disease thing is, I think, one of the most important aspects of this as far as showing clear. People are really bad at abstract verbal arguments. If someone came in starting with a disagreement about agency or whatever, I would not expect to persuade them with abstract verbal arguments, even though I think those abstract verbal arguments are very solid. You need tangible empirical evidence to cut through. So just as a great example is this AI thing, for decades there were arguments. Is it possible to build AI? And these were abstract verbal arguments. And one side was definitely right and one side was definitely wrong, but no progress was made on the debate for decades because there was no tangible evidence. Then ChatGPT comes along and that debate just dies because now there's tangible physical evidence that you can build AI. So you need that for everything, and you need that for what we're discussing right now. And the most powerful thing that Mike does is he's really into producing that kind of evidence, and he knows how important that is. And the disease thing is going to be one of the most powerful ways we're going to produce tangible evidence because these ideas are very important for curing cancer. So the way Mike and other people who are into this paradigm talk about cancer is they talk about it the way economists talk about externality. You have cells that are disconnected from the bioelectric system, which is just like how a firm's activities, like if it's pollution, is disconnected from the price system. That's economic cancer. And the solution that Mike's lab is working on is Pigouvian taxes, which is reconnect it back to the bioelectric system, just like economists would try to reconnect the economic activity back to the price system. So if those efforts are able to scale up and, first of all, cure cancer, which I think would be a pretty neat thing to do, but then also prove her right about this, because only the economic kind of paradigm is consistent with that perspective. So if and when that works out, I think that's going to be really powerful evidence that will change a lot of minds.
Mm. I even really like, so on cancer, yeah, I think it's and Mike has loads of stuff about bioelectricity, about that, about reconnecting cells to the system, and then like think about that in just more general economic terms makes sense. Even you had an article, was it about Parkinson's, and about
Yeah, yeah,
how,
yeah.
what is a what is the equivalent of a recession in
Of a
biology?
recession, yeah. So the like basic model of a recession in economics is there's nothing when you have a recession, it's weird because you have all these like factories that aren't doing anything and all these people out of work. But the factories are fine. They still work just fine. And like the people are fine. They didn't all get like lazy. They don't all have broken legs. They can work. So if the factories work and the people work, why isn't the economy working? And the answer is what you're missing is like a certain coordinating or motivating juice. There isn't enough money in the economy relative to the price level. You need to juice the economy with more money, and that gets everything moving again. Parkinson's works similarly, where at first it looks like people just have like these muscle issues, like they can't control their muscles. But in my understanding, their muscles are actually usually fine. What's going on is that they lack motivation. And like there's evidence for this, right? Someone who has Parkinson's, their ability to move depends on how motivating the task is. Like normally they can't move, but then if their house catches on fire, suddenly they can run out of the door. Or if a horse goes wild in the street, suddenly they can run away. Or even if you say like walk here, they can't do it. But if you draw a line in the ground and say cross this line, they can do it because it's more motivating. So potentially a cure to Parkinson's would be just like doing basically quantitative easing or something. We just try to inject more motivating juice into the body, and all of a sudden it can move again because the physical systems are fine. The coordinating or motivating juice is in short supply. And so if again that kind of model works out, that would be really powerful evidence for the economic perspective.
This has
It's
been
a
really
fun idea.
fun. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, that I love that. And I didn't understand it at first, and I was like, why should I read this? Why would Parkinson's be related to the economy? But
That's a
it
great
makes
question, Jack. Why should everyone read my blog?
they should. Well, for one, you can see me in the comments, um, and so that's a reason. No,
Yes, it is.
I mean, you only had a couple when I first started reading it. Now there's loads.
Mhm.
So I recommend people go read it. I'll put a link in the description. What other
Wise
things do you have?
words from Jack Roycroft.
And I guess we were talking about it. Your paper with Michael Levin's coming out some point
Hopefully
next
by
few
the end of
months.
this month. I'm not. It's my first paper, so I'm not super sure with academic publishing. That's my understanding of what the publisher's website should imply.
Awesome. It's I haven't published anything either, but then it seems to like take some endless purgatory, and then eventually things get released. But maybe it
Yeah.
depends on the journal.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I look forward to it if it does
Yeah.
come out soon.
Yeah.
Okay,
Hopefully.
awesome.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.